Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and it's good to see you all here today. Um, we've been discussing this, I think, remarkable text by Shantideva, 8th century Indian Buddhist practitioner and scholar. A text that is especially embraced in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but is really a part of all Mahayana Buddhism, including Zen. And it's entitled The Way of the Bodhisattva in translation. And it's divided into sections. And the section we were discussing last week was entitled, in this translation, Diligence. It might also be called zeal or enthusiasm or energy. Virya is the Sanskrit word, which literally means manfulness, but that is it's obviously not gender specific because energy, enthusiasm, and zeal are traits beyond gender and apply to everyone. We've gotten most of the way through that chapter. There are a couple sections at the end I would like to read, however, before we get into the next chapter. And one of them begins this way. When I am beleaguered by defilements, I will stand and face them in 1,000 ways. I'll not surrender to the host of the afflictions, but like a lion, I will stand amid a crowd of foxes. However great may be their peril, people will by reflex regard however great be their peril, people will by reflex guard their eyes. And likewise, I, whatever dangers come, must not fall down beneath defilement's power. Better for me to be burned to death, and better to be killed, my head cut off. At no time will I bow and scrape before that foe of mine, defiled emotion. Thus, in every time and place, I will not wander from the wholesome path. Expressing here, Shantideva, a warlike determination to deal with defilements, basically greed, hatred, delusion, or confusion. But then at the end, there's a more, I guess, tempered comment. At all times and in any situation, how can I make mindfulness my constant habit? Thinking thus, I will desire to meet with teachers and fulfill the proper tasks. By all means, then, before I start some work, that I might have the strength sufficient to task, I will recall the teachings upon carefulness and lightly rise to what is to be done. Just as flaxen threads waft to and fro, impelled by every breath of wind, so all I do will be achieved, controlled by movements of a joyful heart. Just as flaxen threads waft to and fro, impelled by every breath of wind, so all I do will be achieved, controlled by movements of a joyful heart. I remember what this brought to mind was at one point in my working career, I um, uh, changed jobs. I moved from one institution to another, and I noticed the just a drastic change in culture in the new institution, largely due to the personalities involved and the traditions. But at my former institution, it there was more of an attitude of everyone has their job, and if other people aren't doing their job, it's an occasion for blame. Everyone has their defined roles. And at the institution I moved to, it was refreshing to find that there was more of a teamwork approach. Everyone sort of chipped in and did what was necessary and helped each other out. And there was a certain joyfulness about this. So sometimes these verses of Shantideva can sound pretty stern, but I think it's important to keep in mind that there is this world of joy out there that is part of being fully engaged in what you're doing, that is part of trying to be of benefit to all beings. It's not just an arduous task. It can be controlled by movements of a joyful heart, as he puts it. So he ends the chapter in that way and transitions into the next chapter, which is entitled with the Sanskrit word jhana, from which the Chinese word chan is derived, from which the Japanese word zen is derived. So this chapter is actually entitled Zen. And the Sanskrit word jhana has complex meanings because there are many different forms of meditative practice that are mentioned in the Buddhist literature, going back to the recorded teachings of the Buddha. And you might expect that a chapter entitled essentially, it's translated here, meditative concentration, would be sort of about maybe some meditation practices, maybe something esoteric that you haven't heard before. Mostly the chapter is not that. And especially the first part of the chapter is about distractions, things that can distract from the bodhisattva path. The bodhisattva path being cultivation of wisdom and compassion for the benefit of all beings, oneself included. But things that can distract us. And he talks about several different distractions. I think the weight of the content is heavily balanced toward his audience, which at that time was young men vowed to celibacy in the monastery. So there's a lot about lust, and which is, frankly, a distraction, but we have so many other distractions now. And as we read through this, I guess I would like to be thinking about all the different things that distract us now. I don't think Shantideva could have had any kind of imagination of what the realm of distraction that we live in the 21st century. But we'll start with some of the chapter. Cultivating diligence or carefulness, as just described, in concentration, I will place my mind for those whose minds are slack and wandering, are caught between the fangs of affliction. In concentration, I will place my mind. For those whose minds are slack and wandering, are caught between the fangs of afflictions. In solitude, the mind and body are not troubled by distraction. Therefore, leave the worldly life and totally abandon mental wanderings. Because of loved ones and desire for gain, we fail to turn away from worldly things. These, then, are the first things to renounce. The prudent should conduct themselves like this. Well, again, he's talking to young monks, in this case, probably entirely male. But because of loved ones and desire for gain, we fail to turn away from worldly things. Loved ones is an interesting term. It's used usually to describe one's family members and friends. And it highlights how the word love or loved is variably used in the English language. And usually we consider attachment to loved ones as being a good thing. But consider that if there are loved ones, there have to be everybody else who's not a loved one. And these writings about the Bodhisattva path really advocate an unconditional kind of love for all beings, not just humans, for all living beings. Not privileging, prioritizing people we happen to be related to by genetics or history above all else. This is somewhat countercultural and maybe counterinstinctual, but we'll keep that in mind and go on to the next section, or at least a following section. Starting at verse 7, if I crave for other beings, a veil is cast upon the perfect truth. Wholesome dissolution melts away, and finally, there comes the sting of pain. My thoughts are all for them, and thus my life is frittered away. My family and friends all change and pass, for whom the changeless Dharma is cast out. For if I act like childish beings, sure it is that I shall fall to evil destinies. So why do I keep company with infants who lead me to a state so far from virtue? One moment friends, the next they're bitter enemies. Even pleasant things arouse their discontent, Ordinary people, it is hard to please them. So I think Shantideva is alluding to something here that is probably a common experience for all of us at some time or another. At first, he's talking about craving for other beings, uh, and as a kind exercising a veil over what he calls wholesome disillusionment, which might be also termed disenchantment, becoming enchanted by someone else or other people, which is a common human event, to become enchanted or infatuated with another being, which throws a veil over perfect truth, disregarding any failings or limitations of that person or other things that may not be so attractive to think about. And then he talks about my thoughts are all for them, and thus my life is frittered away. I think referring to, as I see this, the potential to get caught up in the social drama, be it with family or other people, to get pulled in to all kinds of entanglements which distract us, from our aspiration for wisdom and compassion for the benefit of all beings, not just a small subset of beings. And then he refers to how friends and come and go. Things change, relationships change, these things come and go. Whereas we value Sangha, we value community, the reality is that people change, relationships change, and some things that may be beneficial at one time are no longer beneficial at another time. And he ends with kind of a lament about ordinary people. It's hard to please them all. And I think we all know that. There's a risk here in being haughty or arrogant, sort of rising above all of the fray and feeling yourself immune to it in a way. It helps to recognize that we all get caught up. It's a hazard for everyone. But when you can see it happening, creating some distance is what Shantideva advocates. Therefore, flee, he goes on, the company of childish people. Greet them when you meet with smiles that keep on terms of common courtesy. Greet them when you meet with smiles that keep on terms of common courtesy without inviting intimate relations. like bees that get their honey from the flowers. Take only what will serve the practice of the Dharma. Treat everyone like new acquaintances and keep yourself from close familiarity. Um, this passage actually reflects a passage well known, I'm sure, to Shantideva and all of the monastics present, because something very similar is included in the Prati Moksha, which is sort of the rules of conduct for monks. The Mahayana version of that, which is quite similar to the Theravadan or early Buddhist version. The section from the Prati Moksha reads like this in translation: not censuring others, not harming others, and restraint according to the Prati Moksha, moderation in eating, secluded dwelling, and union with meditative practice. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. As a bee, not agitating the scent or color of a flower, flies away, taking only the nectar, so should a sage enter a village. One should not contemplate the faults of others or what is done and not done by others, but one should contemplate the same difficulties concerning him or herself. It implies a certain reflection, but not aloofness. It reminds me of Dogen's phrase, taking the backward step and turning the light inward. Taking the backward step from all the human drama, all the potential distractions, and turning the light inward. So now we have what has been called the attention economy, where people actually, in a sense, pay for your eyeballs, is the phrase. And there's constant grabbing for attention in this culture. Shantideva is encouraging us to remember the value of solitude, silence, to not be caught up in all the goings on, in all the fray, even among friends and family, or perhaps especially among friends and family. And to, in a sense, keep your eyes on the prize, the Bodhisattva path, wisdom and compassion for the benefit of all beings. I think I'll stop there, and maybe we'll go on with this chapter. There's a lot more to it, but what kind of distractions tend to grab you? How do you deal with it? How can you stay, in a sense, above the fray without being aloof or self-righteous? How do we see the faults of others in ourselves? And maintain compassion for others without getting caught up in their drama. Thank you for listening today. I very much appreciate your presence, and we'll go into breakout rooms in a moment, and I'll see you back in a few minutes.